Okay, hello and welcome. I'm Jason Gumpert from msdynamicsworld.com, and we're here for a new session examining the options and considerations around moving Dynamics NAV to the cloud. Today we're joined by Elliot Fishman, CEO of Catapult ERP. Elliot has been a great supporter of our site over the last couple of years. You've probably read some of his articles covering the NAV space, or perhaps seen him in one of our NAV roundtable discussions we've held periodically. Before we jump into today's session, I do just want to note that we've been running quite a few sessions, especially through fall of 2014, and if you missed any of those or want to review any, I do invite you to check out our webcast section. You can see the URL right there. We've got dozens of sessions up there at this point, all available on demand for you to browse, to filter based on the business interests or the products that you care about. Please also know that we are in the process of planning some new sessions, even beyond January, out starting in April and running through the spring. We've got new series of sessions on financial automation, BI and reporting, CRM, another area where the Catapult team has participated in the past. And we do invite you to stay on the lookout for those. And if you have things you'd like to see webcasts on, or even ideas for your own presentations that you'd like to share, feel free to contact me. You can see my email address down at the bottom of the slide there. So with that, I would like to now turn things over to Elliot to take the stage. Elliot, are you there?
Yeah, thanks very much, Jason. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you. I'm giving you control right now, so you should be able to, yep.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. So today, what I want to talk about is how to think about moving your on-premise NAV implementation to the cloud, and we'll look at that through a few different lenses, and hopefully I can leave you with some ways to think about how to go about making that decision, whether or not it's a good idea and appropriate for your company, and if so, some considerations to help guide you in the process of making that move. So just a little bit of background about Catapult. We are a Microsoft Dynamics NAV and CRM partner based in Western Canada, serving Pacific Northwest and Western Canada, and most of our business centers on long-term support and business process improvement for companies running NAV and CRM. So in terms of structuring today's presentation and talk, what I thought I would do is start with a discussion of the cloud itself, and it's a bit of a confusing term because it's become so predominant and used in marketing as well as to describe certain types of technology. And so I want to narrow down the definition, so at least in this context, we have a very clear framework for what we mean by cloud. And then dig into a bit of, fact versus fiction. There's a lot of myths still, although the cloud is sort of reaching a point where, the technology is fairly mature. There's still quite a bit of fear and uncertainty related to it, and therefore a number of popular myths that I'd like to just dig into and address quickly before we dive into NAV. And then we'll switch and talk about NAV and what the cloud alternatives are for running Dynamics NAV in the cloud. Talk about some of the experiences we've had to date in helping clients move NAV to the cloud, and talk about how to start planning your cloud migration. One thing I'm curious about is how many people in the audience today have had experience in their organizations porting on-premise applications to the cloud, or for that matter, using cloud applications of any kind, whether they started on-prem or not. And if you want to just enter your comments in the chat, that would be great, and get some ideas going. So let's talk about what the cloud is exactly. So one of the ways I like to think about the cloud before we even talk about technology is that the cloud is kind of a brand. It's become a very popular term, that has been adopted in a variety of cases by technology vendors and by services companies working with technology. and certainly as a descriptor for a category of technology. And so the reason I say it's a brand is because if you look at the popular names like Microsoft and FedEx and Facebook on the left, these are proprietary brands that that were very much designed by those companies, and each one of them has a brand promise. There are certain attributes associated with each of these logos that you probably think of. When we think of FedEx, of course we think about guaranteed overnight delivery. When we think about Facebook, we think about social networking and making connections and keeping those connections active and social sharing. When we think of I won't address what we think of Microsoft, but all of these brands have very specific attributes. McDonald's, we know exactly what to expect from McDonald's, whether you like McDonald's or not. Southwest Airlines, economical flights from point to point, serving second-tier airports in many cities across the U.S. So, point being that the cloud similarly has a set of attributes, very specific attributes. So regardless of whether you're talking about the cloud in the context of NAV or the cloud in the context of any other category of technology, I've come to sort of see it as a descriptor that kind of broadly relates to four attributes. And the only thing about the cloud brand is that it's kind of an open source brand. Nobody owns it. It's not a trademarked term, as far as I know, that belongs to any one company. And so the attributes that are associated with it have come about through the kinds of ways in which cloud technology has become relevant in our business landscape. Thanks for the input on the chat, by the way. So, a couple things about the cloud. We expect that the software is going to be easy to use. We expect that it's going to be cheaper. One of the hallmarks of the cloud as well is that we're not locked in. We can take our data when we want and leave and go to another cloud or bring that data in-house, and then it's super easy to use. So that it is user friendly. So that there's a bunch of these attributes are common across all of the different applications of the cloud. And then one of the key features of the cloud from a business model point of view that differentiates it from on-premise technology is that it's driven by a consumption-based purchasing model. So whereas on-premise technology is typically funded through capital expenditure, so large expenditures up front to acquire capital assets, software and hardware that are ultimately posted to a balance sheet and depreciated, cloud technology is usually purchased through operating expense. So it's usually purchased in smaller amounts on a consumption basis as you go. So you're not locked in. There's no big upfront purchase typically with the cloud. Just in terms of the prevalence of the cloud, Microsoft alone published this slide or this poster. I think this is probably almost a year old at this point. They claim to offer over 200 plus cloud services, and that ranges from consumer devices like Xbox Live and connecting gamers all over the place to hosted email, cloud storage like SkyDrive, which is now OneDrive, or Office 365. So the cloud is really predominant and everywhere now. So I do want to address the different deployment models for the cloud. There are sort of three categories, and we sometimes refer to these. Most cloud technology is delivered as we said, it's driven by consumption economics, and so we tend to say that the cloud is delivered as a service. So I'm sure you've all heard of SaaS or software as a service. There's also PaaS or platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. And so all of these different deployment models relate to different ways that companies can access technology in the cloud. And so just to review quickly, basically they just represent different, you can think of them as a continuum where in infrastructure as a service, the cloud provider is essentially providing exactly that, a set of infrastructure resources on top of which you can manage middleware, your data, and your applications. So they just provide the fundamental infrastructure, networking and storage and server infrastructure that you need to run an application. Platform as a service goes a little bit further. You might think of Office 365 from Microsoft. as a platform as a service. You can build custom applications using SharePoint and other tools in Office 365, and then you manage those applications. But the platform itself, so the hardware infrastructure, the networking infrastructure, server storage, as well as all of that development capability is provided as a service in Office 365. And then the most sort of all-encompassing model, and the one that most people are familiar with, is software as a service. So a good example would be Microsoft CRM Online, where the consumption model is based on a single per user per month type of fee that includes everything. It includes all of the fundamental infrastructure, all the middleware in the application itself, and storage. And so you're just paying for all of that to be managed and provided by Microsoft. So all these different models are relevant in the cloud. So let's just breeze through a few kind of myths and reality. So the first thing that comes up all the time is that there's definitely some fear that the cloud is not a secure place for our data. You know, there's a trust issue. We don't want our data out there in the cloud. We feel more comfortable having it running on infrastructure that sits in our office. The truth is that your data is undoubtedly more secure in the cloud. The best cloud providers have put a ton of operational rigor into the way they run their data centers. They offer very solid design that prioritizes security and leverages expertise in that design that most companies are not able to access locally in their own organizations. So, and there are standards as well, like ISO, HIPAA, and FISMA that provide frameworks in which cloud data centers can become certified, also providing reassurance that they've been built out well and that they're secure. So, you know, this is a significantly different scenario than the servers you run in your own organizations, which typically do not have to meet these kinds of standards. As well, providers have dedicated expert teams, and the cloud isn't an all or nothing proposition. It is certainly possible to have private clouds and hybrid clouds where you have some of your data in the cloud and connecting with some data that's local as well. So security is actually, in my opinion, is that security is actually greater when it comes to cloud than on-premise. So I just wanted to show this quick slide, you know, just comparing local infrastructure versus an Azure data center. You know, I hope your server room doesn't look like the image on the left. It's you know, being a bit tongue-in-cheek here, but you know, I've seen lots of server rooms that don't look too far different from this. You know, the challenge with local infrastructure is very inexpensive to set up and maintain. It doesn't scale in a very economical way. You know, it consumes a lot of resources to manage it. And for most companies, and my assumption is most of you, if you're running NAV, your core strength is your business. It's not maintaining hardware and networking resources. As well, you may have architectural and operational limitations that just impose restrictions on exactly how robust you can be. Compare that to, say, an Azure data center. Microsoft Azure. Azure is Microsoft's cloud infrastructure offering. It's certainly not the only one. There's Amazon Web Services. There's a number of other large-scale cloud providers as well. So just to focus on Azure for the moment, there are, you know, they run 8 data centers worldwide. They use these containers, which contain thousands of servers each. They've invested about $3 billion in their infrastructure, and each one of those containers contains about 360 servers. And all of this is managed with a very small amount of staff. So it's a highly efficient structure, and those cost savings translate into cost savings for those who choose to consume that infrastructure. Second myth is that, not that different from security, but privacy. You know, the notion that if we put our data in the cloud, it might be sold to marketers or it might get mixed up with somebody else's. It's simply not true. the data in the cloud belongs to you. Cloud contracts are fairly robust. I've reviewed many, and they're very black and white. Cloud providers are not able to use your data even in aggregate to resell to third parties. Your data strictly belongs to you, and it's not mixed up with everyone else's. There's really no risk, at least in the most robust cloud offerings, that your data is going to get intermingled with other companies' data. So, again, as far as privacy is concerned, I feel that there's really no risk here, and I haven't heard of any incidents that are that would make me particularly worried. There's concern that comes up sometimes that the cloud is not mature, or that it's just sort of a flavor of the month technology. I think the truth here is that it's a new term, but we've been using cloud type technology for a long time. Cloud services are much more robust than local infrastructure, and the companies that are providing cloud services at a large scale have been doing this for many, many years. The amount of investment that continues to pour into cloud is significant. I haven't got statistics or data to share, but if you check with Forrester or Gartner or any of the analyst groups who report on that, it's really quite astounding how much money is pouring into cloud technology, and adoption rates are very high as well. So it's pretty clear that cloud computing is a game-changing approach to technology, and eventually will impact pretty much every company. Some companies, I run into companies who struggle with the aspect of not owning the infrastructure or the software that they're using. When you buy infrastructure and install it in your company, when you buy software and run it on those servers, you own it. When you're just consuming it as you go, you don't own it. You're renting it. This is a very, very personal decision to most organizations. In a lot of ways, it has a lot to do with the particular buying preferences of organizations. I haven't seen the downside to not owning technology. Over time, I believe that the expense is more or less on par, because local infrastructure is hard to scale, becomes obsolete, it breaks. You ultimately end up spending a lot of money keeping it up to date. So, not owning allows you to be not locked in, which means that you can adopt solutions on a different set of terms than buying allows you to. Reliability comes up sometimes. Certainly, cloud is not great for every single situation. If you operate a business with remote locations that have unreliable internet connections, for example, I have clients in the mining industry or in the oil and gas industry who have facilities in remote locations. The cloud is not necessarily going to be a very viable option for deploying technology to those remote locations, because the cloud does depend on a reliable internet connection. However, most of us, the vast majority now, can rely on readily available internet technology. Most companies have a backup ISP from what I see these days. So, and most contracts guarantee well over 99% uptime. And in our experience so far, we've not seen reliability or access becoming an issue. I can't think of a single case for a NAV customer or even a CRM customer where a system outage or an issue with the cloud provider or even the ISP prevented business from getting done. However, I have seen many times when local infrastructure failed, causing, for example, a client recently had a local server fail, and EDI transactions were not getting through. It wasn't picked up for a few days, and revenue was lost. So I think the case of the cloud is pretty strong. Performance comes up as well as a concern. I think it depends on the application and the scenario. There are different types of clouds, and there are different types of situations. Certainly running business intelligence solutions, if you're doing a lot of data analysis and computation and reporting with a database in the cloud, can be challenging. That said, it would only be challenging if you had a very, very large database. We have not seen any issues when it comes to supporting business intelligence over NAV with cloud deployment. So you may have, and I'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about NAV specifically and ways, the different deployment options in the cloud and which ones support higher performance or with different kinds of performance. As well, hybrid solutions where some capabilities are still deployed locally and some other capabilities are deployed to the cloud, and having them integrated can also optimize performance. I think we've kind of spoken about the expense side of things. You know, cloud offers economies of scale. Data centers, you know, companies that are building out billion-dollar data centers can pass those savings on to the end user. You know, we see that the costs, although it can be hard to grapple with, you know, going to a couple $100 a month fee for infrastructure as a service versus maybe a $10,000 or $12,000 expenditure to set up some infrastructure in the first place. When you factor in the time it takes and the cost to maintain, as well as the occasional maintenance that's required and the inevitable replacement of drives that fail or technology that simply doesn't last, I think that the costs and the peace of mind make it a fairly economical proposition. Yeah, and we've also talked about the fact that, you know, it's not an all or nothing proposition. It's not about deciding whether you're going to be in the cloud or not be in the cloud. It's about deciding what you're going to put in the cloud and what you'll keep locally. So certainly, it's not although it's important to have an overall cloud strategy. There's no requirement. It's not an all or nothing decision, and that's important. So some of that may have been reviewed for some of you. So thank you for sticking with me. Now let's talk about NAV in the cloud and specifically what we're seeing there. So first of all, software as a service options for NAV. So if you're already running NAV today, then my guess is you probably own it, because the traditional model for acquiring NAV was based on perpetual licensing, meaning you purchased the upfront license, and you may be paying annual enhancement or annual maintenance fees so that you have access to updates, hot fixes, roll-ups, and subsequent versions. And of course, as you know, NAV is on a one-year annual upgrade path now. So, you know, staying on maintenance keeps you current. However, if you own the software, you know, certainly this won't be relevant for you, because SaaS is where you bundle the software fee, you know, for NAV, SQL Server, all of the software, along with the underlying infrastructure, into a per user per month pricing package. But if you're considering NAV, there are some options. I will be honest, it is challenging and problematic. NAV has still not, Microsoft themselves do not offer a true SaaS offering for NAV. So there is no way to license NAV in a pure SaaS environment the way you can with CRM from Microsoft. However, some partners, some Microsoft partners like SaaS Plaza, or I think Data Haven maybe, I'm not sure exactly who else, but there's a couple companies that have basically their partner relationship with Microsoft is based on something called a service provider license agreement, which means that they can resell NAV on a subscription basis. However, the challenge that I have seen is that it's still a very clumsy and expensive model, and it really doesn't boil down to a per user per month fee. You get there, but it's composed of separate line items for the NAV license itself, per user per month, you know, which will probably be for the advanced management. I've seen it around 100 to 120 per user per month, plus a monthly fee for the environments, so the actual infrastructure, a fee for storage. You'll pay a fee for the access. So if you're going to use RDP, for example, remote desktop, to access NAV in this environment, you pay for RDP licenses. All of that can be priced out. So this is really more of a pricing strategy that some partners are making possible for having NAV. However, it's very clumsy, and I don't believe it's economical, except in cases where there are a very small number of users, like less than 5. As well, there is no migration path for customers that own licenses. So if you have perpetual license, if you own your licenses, unless you were not on maintenance for quite a long time and you were looking at, maybe you're on NAV 5 and you've stopped paying maintenance for many years and you're thinking of upgrading to NAV 2015, you may want to, you may look at this as a way of, rather than catching up on an enhancement, since you'll be buying new any licenses anyway, it could be worth it to explore this. However, again, I'm not really seeing the model here emerge as quickly as the market would like. We certainly get a lot of requests and interest in NAV on a SaaS basis, but it's generally not possible. So what is possible for NAV? Well, for NAV, the really interesting story is around infrastructure as a service. So the hardware and network infrastructure that NAV runs on. So I want to differentiate between traditional hosting and infrastructure as a service. We've had clients for many years who host their NAV environments in third-party data centers. However, traditional hosting is typically based on dedicated infrastructure. So, just as you might have a set of boxes running in your server room, or blades, or rack, rack servers running in your server room with NAV on them, you can go to a traditional host provider and either get dedicated technology or co-locate with someone else, but essentially you're not benefiting from the economies of scale that the multi-tenant architecture in the cloud provides. So with the cloud, virtual machines are really the building blocks. So when you run NAV in the cloud, you're running NAV on a virtual machine, which takes advantage of all of the computing capacity available within that cloud, and the cloud provider allocates the resources. And there are a set of technologies that provide security between the different virtual machines and the different bits of technology, so that to make sure that you don't, this is what makes multi-tenancy work, and makes sure that everybody still has access to their environment, their environment only. With infrastructure as a service, you pay as you go, and there usually are no upfront costs, maybe costs for migrating NAV, for example, but not necessarily, there's usually no upfront fee to get going. And of course, you can easily scale up or down, and I'll talk more about how that works in Azure. As well, it is incredibly easy to provision and manage servers, and that's very different than hosting NAV locally, where if you want to provision a new server, for example, if you want to create a new test environment, or if you want to build a new server, that can be a complex task that can take hours to days to weeks to happen, depending on the organization. I've sometimes been very surprised to see how long that can take locally. In the cloud, it's literally clicking a few buttons to provision new servers. So I'm going to focus on so going forward, as I talk about infrastructure as a service, I'll focus on Microsoft Azure. This is the cloud infrastructure as a service offering from Microsoft, and the one the one that I'm most familiar with at this point. I'm sure that similar considerations apply to other cloud providers as well, but Azure is a natural starting point for thinking about NAV. It's certainly not a requirement. We also, for example, have a local partner that provides we have some clients that require their servers to be run on data centers that live in Canada due to regulation, for example. And so we have a hosting provider locally that offers almost identical capabilities to Azure. But I'll just focus on Azure for now, just for simplicity. So typically, when a customer is running NAV on Azure, they run NAV and SQL Server on the same virtual machine. This is very similar to what you might do on local infrastructure. In many situations with a typical NAV deployment architecture, NAV and SQL are running on the same machine. It's not a requirement. You can separate them into two separate machines as well. Most of what we see, though, is on the same box or on the same virtual machine in the case of the cloud. And then in terms of sizing that virtual machine with Azure, you can choose from a set of standard server configurations, And basically what you're choosing is you're setting the number of CPUs and the speed, and then choosing the RAM level that you want. And what's great is that you're not locked in. If you choose a VM size that turns out to be underperforming, you literally have to shut it down, reallocate some resources, and start it back up, which might take a couple of minutes, and all of a sudden NAV is running on a totally different machine, which is something that you simply just cannot do on local infrastructure. In terms of storage for cloud hosting or infrastructure as a service, finding that 250 gigs is fairly typical for an average NAV implementation. Obviously, that's very, very case specific. Azure, in the case of Azure, it automatically calculates the storage that you need. Because it's a multi-tenant environment, there's no risk of running out of storage and then finding out in some sort of accidental way that you're bumping up against a storage limit. Storage is sort of automatically scaled to the needs. As well, Azure offers geo-redundant options so that if you want your data as part of your disaster recovery strategy, if you want your data to be mirrored in different data centers, that's simple, just as easy as ticking a box. And then with the Azure model, pricing is a utility model, meaning that it's based on actual usage. So I think it's really actually down to per minute usage. So the longer you're running your server, plus the consumption of storage and bandwidth determines the bill that you get. That said, we do find that it doesn't really vary much month to month for most companies, and you can manage that cost to some degree by scripting server downtime. So, for example, you can shut down the servers at night if you don't need to do monthly or nightly batch processes. So that can be managed to some degree. However, it's not the only option. There are other partners, a NAV partner called One Click Factory, for example, that offers NAV on Azure with level monthly pricing. So if you prefer $350 a month, no matter what, you can have it that way. If you prefer the variability of $248 one month and $375 another month, depending on usage, and can handle that variability, that's the standard model for Azure. In terms of what I want to show here is just in terms of configuring an Azure virtual machine. This might be 3-4 months out of date. I'm not sure if this is the exact screen, although I think it's pretty close. But if you're on the Microsoft Azure website, to provision a server is simply a matter of moving some sliders, to choose from these standard configurations based on the things you need. So in this case, you see that we're looking at a SQL Server build. So this would be a standard server that not only has all of the infrastructure specified in terms of the CPUs and the RAM, but it also includes SQL Server licensing bundled with it. So in this case, for example, you can see that on the middle slider, I've moved it to medium, which is a 2 times 1.6 gigahertz CPU with 3.5 gigs of RAM, and estimated usage based on full uptime for a month would be $552. So this is just the maximum monthly fee. Microsoft published a few white papers that you can download benchmarking NAV on Azure performance. I don't know how well you can see the data, but essentially what they did was they created some typical some different user profiles where they were processing different numbers of tasks and transactions, and they evaluated how many concurrent sessions each Azure server configuration could handle before performance started to become problematic. And what I found very interesting is that, I don't think you can see these numbers super clearly here, but it doesn't start to become a problem for any of these. Even the medium server configuration still performs at a fairly high level of within acceptable parameters up to well over 100 users, which is not typical for most NAV customers. Most NAV customers are under 25 users. Of course, many exceptions to that. But in terms of concurrent users, you'd have to have a massive number of concurrent user sessions performing, a high volume of tasks in NAV, possibly in a highly customized environment, before Azure's smaller configurations became problematic. We find that most companies tend to the medium or large configuration. Large just offers an additional buffer for performance. Some considerations in terms of sizing your virtual machines are the extent of customization that you have in your NAV solution, the volume of data in your database, certainly how you want SQL Server tuned, and then usage patterns. If you have a high number of users with concurrent sessions doing a high volume of tasks, that suggests a larger configuration. And another final consideration would be what other applications you're running on that virtual machine. So it's possible as you spin up virtual machines on Azure that you may be running you may set up other line of business applications on those servers as well. So if NAV is not the only application that you're running in those virtual environments on Azure, you may at that point start to consider larger and larger virtual machines. The good news with Azure is you don't have to know up front. And for this goes for most infrastructure as a service cloud providers. You can sort of gauge based on your best guess what you'll need. Certainly model it after your on-premise experience is a way to go. If you're finding that the performance is less than what you need, then it is very easy to reallocate more resources or move from a medium to a large server. You just shut the server down, reset the parameters, and start the virtual machine again. Similarly, Microsoft's in the same white paper, they did some analysis of Azure's infrastructure cost per user per month, and it's very steady across. They looked at these different profiles, again, occasional users, regular users, and so forth. But I find it very interesting is the costs are very similar across all of the server configurations, regardless of the profile. So there's a lot of consistency month to month with Azure, and what we really learned here is that it's you have to get into some fairly complex high volume stuff with NAV before your server specifications become the limiting factor. So hopefully you learned something there about just what the cloud options are for NAV. And now I want to shift into talking about, okay, now we've decided to move NAV to cloud infrastructure, whether it's Azure or something else. Some of the insights that we've learned helping some clients make that move. So there are a few different ways. How do we access NAV on Azure? I mentioned this when we were talking about performance. There are a couple different ways. The first is running the standard Windows client on your local machines and connecting over the wide area network to the cloud. So the benefits here are that you get the exact same desktop user experience. So each user has NAV running on their desktop. They launch it. It connects over the internet to the database effectively that's in the NAV server and the database that's in the cloud. The only downside of the sort of, what we call the thin client or Windows client experience is that the data refresh may be slightly slower than what you're accustomed to when the client applications and the servers are all running within the same local area network. So, be prepared for that. And certainly you don't have to commit to one or the other of these. You could have a deployment that leverages where some users are working with the Windows client over the internet and some are on RDP. So, of course, RDP, I think most people in the NAV world are fairly familiar with a remote desktop session where you launch NAV within an isolated desktop experience. I would say this is the most common and prevalent way to access NAV in a hosted environment. It seems to work pretty smoothly. Of course, the performance is exceptional because when you're launching a remote desktop session, what you're essentially doing is you're accessing a separate environment over the internet where the client and servers are basically running in the same network on the same machines. So data refresh tends to be fantastic, especially when it's all running on Azure infrastructure. you know, and it's a pretty good experience overall. You can do things like copy and paste to the local desktop. So, for example, if you ran a report from NAV out to Excel and saved it on the remote desktop session on the RDP desktop, it's very easy to copy and paste that down to your local desktop. Or as long as your virtual server has internet connectivity, you could save that up to an Office 365 SharePoint environment, which you can then access, of course, from any browser. So it tends to be a fairly seamless experience, very useful, especially if you're running other corporate applications within that environment as well. And you know, another benefit too is you can leave it running. You know, when you sign out of your RDP session, or when you close your RDP session, I should say, you know, your desktop is exactly as you left it. You know, which some users find quite handy. So they can shut down their computer locally in their office, or if they're on a laptop, you know, take it home. You don't have to sign out of anything, and then the next time they log in, you know, they're looking at that session exactly as that NAV session exactly as they left it. So the other client, the other ways to access NAV, which you're probably familiar with already, are the web client, which is very robust now with NAV, useful for, you know, remote and offsite access for situations where you have shared computers. Certainly nice not to have any local software to maintain, so that you're not running a local client. There are some limitations functionally with the web client, but overall it's a pretty good experience. And this, of course, you can use the web client just as you can with a locally hosted NAV implementation. In fact, it may even be easier because in Azure, every single virtual machine comes with a public IP, so you don't have to manage the issue of, if you're hosting locally, you don't have to deal with the issue of people accessing from outside the firewall. It's quite a bit easier to configure. And then there's mobile device access. With NAV 2015, you have a tablet interface available, and as I just said, you know, it's much easier to set up access with NAV on Azure because, you know, you already have that sort of public-facing IP on each virtual machine, and you don't have to deal with, you know, more complex local infrastructure to expose the NAV server and data outside the firewall. So another insight or another consideration when setting up NAV on Azure is single sign-on. Obviously, single sign-on saves quite a bit of time, meaning if you're running a local domain and people are signing on to their computers and their network when they come into the office, opening up NAV and not having to sign in again, you know, is a great way to, you know, improve security and save time. It eliminates the need for multiple IDs. I know password and identity management is a challenge for some companies. And there are two options. We have a hybrid deployment. So if you're running Active Directory locally, which is the most common, then you simply create a VPN tunnel to the virtual machine on Azure and synchronize those environments so that signing on locally to the local AD authenticates you to the virtual machine as well. That's very, very straightforward to set up. As well, there's Azure Active Directory service, which allows you to associate Dynamics NAV user accounts and provides the ability to integrate those NAV user accounts with other, allows you to integrate those using the Microsoft account to other tools like Office 365, CRM. So more and more, I'm sure you're experiencing that you're using your Microsoft ID to access things, even signing into a computer sometimes now with Windows 8, you know, accessing all that that cloud user experience from desktop to desktop can be another way to achieve single sign-on. In terms of actually moving NAV from local infrastructure to Azure, some thoughts to share here. Plan a bit ahead for a bit of downtime. It can be a little time-consuming to, you know, NAV databases can get a bit large. So NAV will be offline for a period of time, and it's important, you know, to treat this like any other system maintenance task where you would clearly communicate ahead of time with your end users that you'll be offline for a little while. Very important not to use NAV locally while you're uploading it to Azure or to a hosted infrastructure, simply because you don't want things to get out of sync. And then once NAV is running in Azure, users can resume access and be pretty much identical experience. In many cases, we've seen where you can rehydrate a NAV environment in the cloud. Users log in and really from their point of view, especially if they're using RDP, it's pretty seamless and invisible. They don't really have an awareness of where NAV is being hosted. But key message here is just sort of plan ahead for it, make sure that people aren't continuing to use NAV while you're doing the migration. Integrating NAV on Azure with Office 365 offers some interesting opportunities as well. Again, this is a situation where you can use the Windows Azure Active Directory service to associate with Microsoft accounts. So you can use your Microsoft account to connect to NAV and then Office 365 as well without signing in multiple times. This can be really helpful if you've deployed any kind of SharePoint applications for NAV within Office 365. So, for example, if you have users who are entering expense data, or if you have a timesheet, if you're using Jobs and you have a timesheet in NAV, for example, or sorry, in SharePoint, for example, that goes against the NAV Jobs module. These are some great use cases where moving everything to Azure or having NAV in Azure, really can speed things up. Yeah, and it's super easy to tie them together. So a couple thoughts on transferring virtual machine images. So it is very easy to do. Basically, you create a local server image and then transfer it up to the cloud. And generally speaking, you don't really have to change anything in NAV itself. So this is really about infrastructure and servers and not so much about NAV. And I won't go through too much of the technical detail, but essentially you need a subscription to Azure, you need Microsoft Azure PowerShell, and then you need your NAV server stored in a VHD file, which is a virtual machine. And there's a lot of tools out there to create VHD files, so it's quite easy to do. Something you could attempt to do yourself if you have very capable network administrators locally in your company, or certainly something that a partner can help you with. And then it's kind of a four-step process. You first prepare the image. You create the NAV image of your NAV server. You create a storage account in Azure, prepare the connection, and then upload the file. Once it's completed uploading, you fire up the virtual server, and it's just like it was in your local environment. In terms of maintenance, so maintaining NAV on Azure, of course, when you're running NAV in a hosted infrastructure environment, it means you don't have to manage the underlying hardware, which is a massive burden lifted. However, it doesn't change the requirement for regular NAV backups and system maintenance. So again, this is not software as a service, this is infrastructure as a service. So all of the infrastructure is maintained, but you're still responsible for regular NAV backups. Of course, geo-redundant storage can give you a bit of additional peace of mind around the data itself, but you still need a plan for doing daily backups of SQL. Great idea to take VHD backups as well. The biggest risk you need to manage, just like you do with NAV running on local infrastructure, is the possibility for data corruption. So, of course, taking those backups and then storing them it can be local. You can take those backups and store them locally, or you can store them in the cloud as well. Also important, to make sure that you're doing your patching of your servers. So, Windows Server and SQL Server, and then the NAV server itself. All of these things, are updated and hotfixed periodically by Microsoft. So again, that's software, not infrastructure. So although Microsoft may provide the SQL licensing in Azure, you're still responsible to make sure that that software is configured and updated as you would with a local environment. So just the key message here is that moving to infrastructure as a service doesn't totally get you off the hook for all of the maintenance tasks, but it takes the big headache out of maintaining the underlying infrastructure away. And you can automate a lot of this, of course, using, as I'm sure already know, using PowerShell script. So in terms of thinking about whether cloud deployment is right for you, there's a couple questions, I suppose, that, you can ask yourself to help make that decision. I mean, the first at the highest level is whether or not your company has a defined cloud strategy. I think that strategy can simply be, yes, we intend to move applications to the cloud, or a sort of a philosophical kind of attitude towards cloud technology. I think it's important to have that at the highest level, because NAV's not the only application you're running, and so making sure that your NAV strategy aligns to your overall company strategy for infrastructure and technology provisioning is important. So if you already have a cloud strategy, of course, that's going to dictate whether or not moving NAV to the cloud makes sense. The biggest consideration, really, though, is whether your existing infrastructure is keeping up. We had a customer, we had a call about 3 weeks ago from a company that we had not done business with before, who said, the first words were, our NAV server conked out. And so we did some investigation, and it had been up and down for 3 or 4 months, and ultimately just totally failed. And so, of course, we were able to extract the database and restore it to a temporary server very easily so that they could become operational. But the next step was then to ask, do we want to go out and buy new? Do you want to go out and buy new hardware and get NAV back up and running on that, or does it make more sense at this point to move it to cloud infrastructure? And the decision was, let's move it to cloud infrastructure because we need something reliable. And to the third bullet point, the client said, we really don't have, we've outsourced the management of our technology environment, and so we don't really have the skills internally to maintain local infrastructure, and the less we have to maintain, the better. So that combination of, do we have the technology infrastructure? Certainly if you've invested in a robust local data center and you have a team of people that are skilled in maintaining and supporting that infrastructure, then it can absolutely make sense to keep NAV. There may be no case to move NAV to the cloud. However, if the infrastructure is starting to fail, if you believe that it's coming up on end of life, if you're contemplating an upgrade, for example, and thinking that the infrastructure that you have may not be adequate for the newest version of NAV, if you're coming from 2009, for example, to 2015, you'll undoubtedly be looking at changing infrastructure. So it may be a good time to look at least ask the question, does it make sense to keep running this locally or move to the cloud? And then, of course, asking the question about risk is important as well. For companies that are exposed to revenue loss or significant business disruption when if NAV goes offline or becomes unavailable due to infrastructure failure, the question can be answered very easily. I think that brings us about to the end. I have a few resources. I guess we have a few minutes as well. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to just type them into the chat window, I guess. A couple of resources here. There's an ebook on how to deploy NAV on Azure, a website. There's those white papers that I mentioned as well, and an ebook that we published recently on upgrading to NAV 2015, which includes some discussion of replatforming on the cloud as well. Are there any? If there are any questions, I'd be happy to dig in. Just type them into the chat window, and if not, I'll hand it back to Jason.
Hey, Elliot. So yeah, we do have a few questions that have come in here. One is whether there is a costing. So the question is there a cost increase depending on how many applications you have on a virtual machine?
Is there a cost increase depending on how many? No, there isn't. Not in Azure. Actually, no, I haven't. That's a great question, and I have not seen anything like that in any infrastructure as a service offering. Typically, you're paying for the infrastructure resources on a consumption basis. So really, you're sort of deciding what level of server resource you want, and you're paying for that on a consumption per month basis. But you can load applications into those environments to your heart's content, and find out the limitations of the infrastructure that you've spec'd out. And again, with Azure in particular, if you get to the limit and find, this isn't performing super well, we can just increase the size of that virtual machine, but it's not dependent on the number of applications.
All right. And
okay, so I see the next question here is, we use Jet Reports, clients located on 50 desktops sharing momentary access to our 5 NAV licenses for our reporting. Have you seen Jet Reports used and run this way? Yes, definitely. We have lots of, most of our clients are running Jet Reports as well. And if I understand correctly, you sort of got very, they're connecting just sort of briefly to run some reports. Yeah, that's no problem. I mean, you just create as long as those users can log into the RDP session, which doesn't, if they can log into the RDP session, they can fire up Excel either within an RDP session, or you can, I believe you can configure it so that you can, as long as if you're sharing, if you have a single sign-on configured, you can run Excel locally with the Jet add-in, and then hit NAV in the cloud. Data refresh may be slightly longer, but I wouldn't see any major issues. I mean, I can't speak specifically to, what it would be like with 50 people hitting, simultaneously, but I wouldn't see any major issues there as long as the server was configured properly. That doesn't seem like a problem. Last question there that I see is if we have a high load at month end, right? So, you've got periodic heavy activity for a few days, and then you return to a normal load to maintain. Yeah. So again, that's super easy. That's the brilliance of infrastructure as a service. It's literally a matter of, if you know that that's the period when you're going to have a heavy load on the system, that for from Monday to Wednesday next week or all of next week is going to be the heavy use time. Simply shut down the virtual server, resize it, and then launch it again. It takes no more than 5 minutes, and the pricing is all automatic. So, this is where that utility pricing really kind of kicks in and, makes a ton of sense. It's just a matter of, your bill will go up during that time because you'll be using more resources more intensively during that time. But yes, still very reasonable. I mean, certainly compared to the challenges of not being able to scale local infrastructure.
Elliot, there are a couple other questions there. Are you seeing them in the Q&A?
Oh, I see. There's another tab there. Oh, wait. Yeah. Oh, okay. Hi. Jet Reports. That's the one about the Jet Reports, 50 desktops.
Oh no, I'm not even seeing that one. So there's one here asking, are there any options for patching and maintenance?
Oh, I see.
Included as part of the service.
So Microsoft and the hosting providers themselves do not, but Microsoft partners will. So that could be in 2 forms. That could be, or 2 types of partners. That could be if your infrastructure provider was a Microsoft Dynamics friendly partner. So for example, like One Click Factory or SaaS Plaza, I believe they probably offer a managed service to keep all of those servers patched and maintained. I can't verify that. I know that we offer that as a managed service for our clients as well. So once they're up and running, we have a maintenance and monitoring service that is a fee that, so what we do is the client can either have a billing relationship with Microsoft directly for Azure, or they can work with a partner. So in our case, most of our Azure customers are receiving their Azure bill through us, on top of which they'll pay a monthly fee for what we call maintenance and monitoring. So there's basically something like there's a monitoring framework. So we'll go in and it's a little bit specific to each customer. So what we'll do is we'll have an infrastructure specialist monitor database application and server logs, making sure periodically making sure that resources are allocated correctly. They'll check the event logs to see if anything of concern comes up. So the goal being reduce the amount of break fix type work that needs to happen, and by being proactive about the maintenance, as well as hot fixes and patches, and especially NAV rollups and updates come out, what we'll do is evaluate those, make recommendations to clients based on what they're particularly using, whether or not they deploy them or not, or simply, NAV updates can, you can wait for rollups or you can wait for an upgrade. And so what we'll do is we'll evaluate those. If it does look like it will offer a meaningful benefit of some kind to a client, what we'll do is we also, manage test environments. So we'll deploy those updates to a testing before we push that out to production. So I guess, that's a long answer. Short answer is third-party service. Can't use something that definitely to ask. Is there any other ones here? Jason, I don't see any more questions.
Yeah, I see one other just asking if there's any relevance to AX in the cloud, or whether you can comment on that at all. Elliot, are you hearing me? Hello? Elliot, I think either I've lost my audio or you've lost your audio.